Today's lesson in driving is brought to you by this guy and his son, one of our awesome local community members. His post goes as follows. Onion to the prick who sideswiped my son's car simply because he was cautiously merging onto the 95 from the left turn lane in front of Food City. Arms waving, yelling, "Yeah, we hear you, California." Then chased my boy down and screamed at him. My kid cares about his stuff. Works full-time, goes to school full-time. Yup, 4.0. Helps me out with his younger brother. He's the kind of kid a lot of you complain doesn't exist anymore. So be on the lookout of a big white truck, Dixie something, construction, or maybe contracting on the door. Phone number started with a 760 area code. If this is you, PM me. If you see this motherfucker, please forward me the rest of the number. I just want to have a visit with the guy. Smiley face. Alright, so let's take a second and break down what he actually said. Apparently, his son was trying to merge from the center merging lane onto the highway, but ended up getting sideswiped and chased down. But to clarify a little, I had to ask, was he sideswiped merging into traffic, or did they chase him down and do it? This is really quite simple. My son wasn't merging fast enough for said douchebag, so said douchebag sideswiped my son from behind on his way past him. You see, a large truck offers a visual advantage that smaller cars don't have. So dipshit grew impatient and thought he'd tech my kid a lesson. As if that weren't enough, he then laid in wait, followed my son, then boxed him in, jumped out of his truck and screamed at him. If that's not clear, I don't know. Read a book or something. Yes, pretty simple. So your son performed a hit and run. Interesting. When merging, you are to yield to the traffic already there. That is the law. Also, there is a law to pull over after an accident to exchange information. If your son had pulled over, there would have been no need to chase him. If that isn't clear, then you need to educate yourself and your son on the laws of the road. Glad you filled in the info needed to accurately assess the situation. I thought it sounded like he tried a hit and run. Turns out that is the case. Lucky the guy didn't call the cops. Moral of the story, yield to traffic when merging and pull over if you're involved in an accident. Obviously, you aren't literate enough to understand the description of the event described herein. Oh, really? Well, why don't we break this down Barney style for you then, buddy? I even found a nice little Google map to try to illustrate this for you. When I went in front of Food City on 95, I noticed that the most logical way that this would play out was if he was going northbound. So here's a crude little diagram of where he probably was and the vehicle that you're so mad about. Notice how the truck is already on the highway and your son is in a merging lane. And since this isn't known to you, I'm going to quote the Arizona DMV driver's manual. When you are entering and exiting the highway, make sure you are in the proper lane well in advance so you can safely enter or exit the highway. Seems like your son was right so far. Next, let's highlight on the important parts. Yield the right-of-way to drivers already on the highway. That truck is already on the highway, your son is not. As you approach and enter a highway travel lane, increase your speed to match that of a vehicle already on the road. I'll give a little leeway on that one since I'm sure that's more towards an actual lane meant to speed up, and it might be hard to do in the center lane. Either way, your son should know that he has to yield to other vehicles already on the highway. It is not their responsibility to slow down for a vehicle merging in. Some do it to be nice, but technically that's not even legal. I'm also going to assume that he had his blinker on, which signaling does not give you the right-of-way. So he still doesn't have the right-of-way for the highway. Meaning that the truck has no obligation to slow down. That is on your son merging. So as of now, we've already established that it was your son who was responsible for said accident, not said douchebag. But let's just say that it was said douchebag who was responsible. Did you and your son know that you could find the answers on what to do if you're involved in an accident in Arizona's driver's manual? Reporting crashes. If you are involved in a crash, you are to remain at the scene to provide assistance to any person injured or to exchange information with other drivers. You should provide driver's license number, name and address, insurance company name and policy number, information on witnesses of the crash, and license plate numbers. meaning that your son, regardless of whether he caused the accident or not, should have pulled over to exchange information with the person, and to make sure that there were no injuries, which by the looks of the pictures there probably were none. Regardless, pulling over is still the law. But you state in your comment that they had to chase your son down, meaning that he didn't stop for an accident, which is technically a hit and run. So it's not really a surprise that said douchebag chased down your son. To go in further detail of what your son could have faced if they would have called the police and got hit with a hit and run, this is what happens if you fail to stop at a crash. If you are a driver involved in a crash where there is damage to a vehicle, injury, or death, you are required by law to stop your vehicle and remain at the scene of the crash. Provide aid to any injured person, including making arrangements for medical treatment by calling 911. Provide your name, address, and license plate number to emergency providers and law enforcement. Conviction for failure to stop will result in your driving privilege being suspended for 1 year if involving only damage to a vehicle. That's where your son would be right there. 1 year suspension of his license, buddy. Revoked for 3 years if involved injury other than death or serious physical injury. Revoked for 5 years, not including the time you are incarcerated if involving a serious physical injury. Or revoked for 10 years, not including the time you are incarcerated if involving a death. So being as there was only damage to a vehicle, your son would qualify for having a suspended license for 1 year, whether he was at fault or not of the accident, because it is a law to stop if there is an accident. And that's if he didn't cause it, which we've already established that your son did cause the crash. Why? Because he needs to yield to the people already on the highway. That is the law. They don't yield to the people merging in. I think what's even more sad and telling about the area is the fact that out of all the comments and reactions, not one person noticed this. Which, after driving in this city for years, really isn't surprising. That was your quick crash course on lessons of driving, brought to you by this guy and his son. Learn the laws of the road, people.